saturated with pleasure? Do you think they can? I don't think so. They can only arise in the real world here, where we're dealing with problems, where we're living in the everyday situation. We've seen clearly how these qualities ennoble people. We've seen it when they've manifested in ourselves. We've seen them in other people. Do people who are just floating around in pleasure realms, who are just living for their own desires, do they exhibit any of these qualities, any of these noble qualities? Sensitivity, nobility, elegance? They don't. They can't. Because they're limited. They're just caught up in their own selfishness and following desire. They don't really bump into their karma. That is, their karma, the fact that they were born in this life, means they came here with karma, or karma is often expressed in the Sanskrit language. This karma means that there's work to be done, and we all have it. Karma is part of the human package. When one's born, one has karma. And if we don't meet our karma, which is our responsibility, our duty, then we're sort of on, say, merry-go-round time. We're just kind of going around and around, or on hold, on carousel time, something like that. It's a bit like when we fall romantically in love. Everything just stops, and we just kind of stay in the same place. As we will see, events converged in such a way to help Siddhartha's eyes open, to prompt him out of this life of luxury and to get on with his life, to get on to being the Buddha. Fortunately, the seminal and shattering events which turned Siddhartha's life around did occur, or we wouldn't have this extraordinary story to tell, and far worse, no Buddha to inspire us and to follow as a great teacher, a master of evolutionary transcendence. A sequence of pivotal events happened which brought him down to earth with a thud. And since all of us are of this earth, our spiritual adventure must begin from here. Once back on the earth, Siddhartha could begin his spiritual quest. For it is only human beings with their superior understanding, their reflective intelligence, and their wisdom who can pursue the ultimate conquest in earnest. This is the place to do it, right here on planet Earth at this time, for this is the only time and the only place where awakening can occur. It's right from here that we must evolve ourselves, and this is what Siddhartha was obliged to turn, to face, and to conquer as well. But what, in fact, is conquerable isn't something to do with weapons or armor or giants or dinosaurs, although we do hear stories of that. What they're pointing to is the inner world. It's our attitude which is conquerable, and it's our attitude which makes all the difference in the world. And we're not here to try to make the world more humane or fair or kind or even benign. It won't go that way. The external world isn't like that. The world is just as it is. And we have to learn to accept it and work with it. But what we can do is we can change our relationship to it through our attitude and our relationship to our senses, because our world is our senses. That's our whole world. The way we see the world, these sense bases that I spoke about, that we're continually stimulating and titillating Siddhartha's life. This is our world. And how we relate to this world, how we relate to these sense bases is the key to finding peace, is the key to transcending this world. This is the primary thing we have to understand, that we no longer cling to the sense bases, to the feelings and sensations that we receive, nor do we push away things in aversion. It's not like that. We don't have to belong to the clung-to world. We don't have to hang on to the world that we're always clinging to. We can transcend that. And that was the remarkable thing that Prince Siddhartha had, in fact, come to understand. That just by radically understanding how to bring our attitude in alignment with pure seeing and pure understanding and pure reflection, we're free from becoming just slaves of our conditioning and our habits and all the other things that keep us mired in the same position for endless periods of time. Some people for who knows how many lifetimes. Siddhartha had ripened to the challenge. He wondered, he was curious, He had the faith, the sense that it was possible to be a world winner, to evolve beyond where he was before, to transcend the ordinary, to become one who was free of slavery and one who was independent. Siddhartha had ripened to the challenge. His life as a prince in the palace of his father, as the heir to the throne, had bottomed out. And so motivated both by the desperation of seeing the dual nature of pleasure as being both pleasurable and painful, and a great sense of faith that something as wonderful as peace was possible, he walked out of the palace and he took the great plunge into the unknown. The great story goes like this. Prince Siddhartha had been requisitioning or been requesting upon his father the opportunity to enter into the village, enter into the town, see what the greater world looked like. And each time his father would deny him this permission. But his request became more and more insistent. And after 7 or 8 or 10 or whatever number, the prince finally was able to convince the king that his curiosity had come to a point where he wouldn't be put off. And the king recognized this and decided that he would have to give him permission. He would have to allow him to enter into the town, but not until he prepared things. And so he gave the prince permission, gave him a charioteer, gave him a chariot, and one day he and his charioteer entered into the city or to the small town. And of course everything was ready and waiting for him. On both sides of the street, the sidewalks were jam-packed with loving people who were just sitting there waiting for just an opportunity to catch a glimpse of the prince, the man who would be their king sometime in the future. And so they just sat there and smiled, a sea of smiling people. And of course the king had prepared everything. There was everything was freshly painted, everything was newly decorated. The people had plenty of flowers, and so there were petals thrown here and there, and it was just like a lawn of petals. And people were just thrilled with this opportunity, and everybody was joyous, everybody was delighted. And so everything looked okay. However, in the back of the crowd, unseen by anybody but the charioteer and Siddhartha, was a bent, sad-looking, obviously very different-looking sort of person. Curious, Siddhartha said to his charioteer, he says, "Who is that person over there? Why is his face not bright and smooth and shining like all these other happy people here? Why is he so different from the others?" And Channa pointed to the man who remained unseen by anyone else. And he said, "Why, sir, that's an old man." Old? Old? Was this man always old, or was this just something that happened to him recently? Neither, sire. There was a time when that man was just like you and I and all these other young, happy, strong-looking people. He was in his youth. But slowly he lost his strength. His body became bent, color in his cheeks started to disappear and fade. He lost most of his teeth. And now he appears the way he does. Surprised and saddened by what the charioteer had told him, Siddhartha responded by another question. He said, "That poor man, is he unique? Is he the only one suffering from this weakness? Or are there others like him?" And the charioteer responded, he said, "Surely you should know this, O Prince. Everyone must experience old age. You, me, all the people in the palace, every moment all of us are getting older. And at some point, if we live long enough, we'll all come to look like that man." These words so shocked the gentle prince that for a long time he was left speechless. He didn't really know what to say. He looked like a person who had been frightened by a lightning bolt that struck just a few feet in front of him. Finally, he regained his composure and his voice, and he said, "Ochana," the name of the charioteer, "I've seen something today I never expected to see. All these young people, someday, are going to experience old age. And that idea frightens me. Turn the chariot about. I want to go back to the palace. The joy and pleasure of this trip has passed away." Chanda did as commanded. And when they arrived back in the palace, the prince wasn't in any mood to talk with anybody. He just entered the palace and went straight to his chambers. And of course, everybody noticed how strange he acted and tried to cheer him up. But he'd have none of it. He just sort of sat a little bit dull and a little bit dazed. And finally, dinner time came, and the chef came with his favorite meal, and all the entourage of servants and dancing girls and musicians, and everybody came in to cheer him up. Nothing worked. Didn't touch his dinner. He just sat in the corner pretty much the whole night thinking, old age, old age, old age, muttering this over and over again until the deep meaning began to sink in. The second fateful journey. And again, Siddhartha was to enter into the village, into the town, which his father had, of course, prepared, redecorated everything, saw that everybody had bundles of flowers. And again, there was a sea of smiling faces waiting for Siddhartha's joyous entrance. And people waited again to see a glimpse of the handsome young prince. But this time, seen again only by Siddhartha and the charioteer, was a vision of a sick person in the back of the crowd. Again, rather startled, the prince looked into the crowd at this unusual person and he said, "Look, Chana, who is that man who coughs so violently, who shakes his body so pitifully and looks so poorly?" And Chana replied, "Why, sire, that's a sick man, a sick person." And Siddhartha said, "Sick? Why is he sick? How did he become that way?" And Chanda responded, he said, "Well, perhaps he ate some food that didn't agree with him, or he had gotten a chill. People become sick for many reasons. But in any case, being sick means his body is out of balance, out of harmony." And Siddhartha said, "Do you mean happy people? Happy people like these people in the crowd? They can become sick?" "Oh yes," answered the charioteer. "Anyone can be sick. One day you can be healthy, and the next day you can be sick. There's no guarantee." Though the prince was thoroughly shocked by this as well. And he thought, and then he thoughtfully replied, he said, "I can't understand. How can people be enjoying themselves, amusing themselves, being delighted by this occasion, if at any time sickness can strike them?" This really baffled him. And then he said to his charioteer, he said, "Turn the chariot around. I've seen enough for today. I've seen more than enough for today. Take me back to the palace." The final shock. Again, Siddhartha and Chana, the charioteer, left the palace to enter into the town. And for the third time, a vision appeared that only the prince and the charioteer could see. A group of sad-eyed people carrying a long box in which lay a body covered in a white sheet passed into one of the lanes. This procession just emerged from one of the houses and slowly made its way down towards the river on one of the side streets. The prince looked at this and again was startled. "Chana, why is that man in the box lying so still? Is he asleep? And why are those people crying? Where are they taking him?" And Chanda looked, and of course immediately he knew what was going on. He is a dead man, sire, and they're going to the river where they'll burn his body. The prince was utterly confused. What do you mean by dead? Dead? And if he's dead, whatever that means, won't he feel anything when they burn him? Please, Channa, explain this. I can't understand this at all. And so Channa disclosed to the prince the truths that his father had been denying him all these years. He said, once this man was alive. He was a child, he was a teenager, he was a young adult. He married, he worked, he supported his family. And in the course of his life, he experienced many pleasures and many times of suffering, just the normal routine. Then he became weaker. He became weaker and weaker and weaker. And finally, he was confined to bed. After being confined to bed, he became more and more confused. He couldn't really recognize the people who were closest to him. And in the end, eventually, his breath just stopped functioning. And in this way, his understanding, the life force, the energy force, which was his body, came to an end. And now we say he's dead. All that is left is the body he cared so much for when he was alive. It lies there cold and without feeling, like a rotten log. And when his family goes to burn this body, he's not going to feel anything, sire, because he's already left it behind. The prince looked at Chanda, looked at the dead man as he was disappearing into the back of the lane. Tell me, Chanda, is it usual for people to die like this? And the charioteer answered, no, my prince, it's not unusual at all. It's true that there are some people who are rarely sick, but everyone without exception must one day die. These words, uttered in innocence by the charioteer, shocked the prince deeply. He was lost for words, and he explained or exclaimed, do you mean that someday my family, my friends, all the people in the palace, all these people who are having a joyous time out here in the town today, they'll all be dead? Do you mean that? Are you serious? I think you are. If this is the case, how blind the world is that they can just go about merrymaking when death is right above their shoulder, right behind them. And why do they bother to wear such fine clothes if someday they're just going to be in a box with a white sheet? Do people have such short memories? Or are they somehow fearless and not afraid of death? Perhaps their hearts are stronger than mine. Come, Channa, turn the chariot around. Again, I've seen more than enough for today. Siddhartha pondered and contemplated the events he had seen. There were 3, and they just plagued his mind and haunted him day in and day out. And he'd just sit there with his mind fixed on these 3 visions: old age, illness, and death. Old age, illness, and death. Old age, illness, and death. He allowed these contemplations to enter deeply into his heart, so that the significance and the implications became part of his awareness. He saw the suffering that all human beings must endure. He saw the limitations of embodied life. He saw that his life had no lasting happiness, no lasting peace, the life that he was living in the palace. And he felt an intense need to put an end to all of life's suffering, and then to share it with everyone. But how to go about doing it? How to go about doing it? The last vision which gave intention and direction to his life was that of a wandering mendicant, a holy man, a man dressed in saffron robes similar to these, the robes of a person intent on putting an end to the suffering of his life or her life. And this is how he met this vision. One day he was sitting in meditation with his eyes closed, feeling quite peaceful and quite relaxed. And all of a sudden his eyes shot open automatically. And there standing in front of him was a man, a very peaceful looking man, wearing robes like this, just standing there. Of course, the prince wasn't feeling any fear. This man had such a radiance of peace. And he looked at him and he said, "Sir, tell me, who are you?" The man answered, "I am one who has become frightened by the sufferings of the world. I've grown tired of the so-called pleasures found in the everyday world, and I've given them all up. I've given up my home, I've given up my previous life, and now I live in caves, in the forest, or wherever I find myself. My sole and only interest is finding the highest, most supreme, perfect happiness." And with this, he disappeared as if by magic, leaving the prince both astonished and overjoyed. "At last, I have found the true purpose of my life," Siddhartha thought. "I too shall give up my way of life and begin my search for future happiness and ultimately the end of suffering." And so, with a firm mind and a steady heart, he rose from his seat and returned to the palace. Now, these visions are certainly potent ones and powerful ones, and if any of us were to meet these kind of visions, regardless of what class we were living in, we would immediately, I think, be transformed by them, just as Siddhartha was, which makes the story all that much more poignant and timely. Supposing we met a sick person, a man with gray skin, wounds, oozing pus. If you bumped into somebody like that on the street, well, it would be just in that moment that we caught sight of that person that we would leave our fantasy world, leaving our own world of selfishness, our own world of self-concern. Perhaps some of you can remember when you were young, children, going to a hospital for the first time, perhaps to visit a relative who was sick. Walking through the wards of the hospital when we were young and impressionable, curiously looking into the rooms and even furtively looking into the rooms, and being shocked and a sense of fear that would strike our hearts when we saw what the patients had to live through, the sense of suffering, the sense of pain, the isolation. And we would have been jarred into a different consciousness by the implications of illness, just as Siddhartha was when he encountered these visions. Or if we ever encountered an accident victim, someone who died, say from a road wreck close to our home, lying in the street, this image would have impacted us much as if we'd been watching a Bergman movie or one of those Swedish movies where the black, somber feeling of death just infuses the mind and the heart, would jar us awake rather quickly. And so it was for Siddhartha, who never encountered such scenes in his fantasy world in the heavenly realms which he inhabited in the palaces. Well, finally, Siddhartha had to conclude through these visions that he too was subject to old age, illness, and death, that he would never be able to escape these. And in reflecting upon these conditions, he felt shocked, humiliated, and disgusted by life. And in the end, the vanity of life just entirely disappeared, and he determined that henceforth he would seek the unborn, the unaging, the deathless, the sourless, the undefiled supreme surcease of bondage and slavery called enlightenment or nibbana.